to the Ollie shirt and shorts video tutorial. Now this one has been a long time coming. I know a lot of you have been having a few little issues with the shirt in respect of attaching the collar and the shirt lining. So yes, let's crack on with this shirt video. Okay, so you cut your back piece out and your two front pieces on your shirt, and you'll notice on the pattern that there's a little notch and a little line that goes down. That's for you to follow to fold that section in half and iron flat. If you do that first, that's going to give you the gauge for where the front line of the shirt is going to sit. So with those two centre fronts ironed in place, the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to line the shoulder seam of the front section, not that bit that you've ironed over, just the single piece of the shoulder seam. You're going to align that with the back of the shirt, and the same on the other side. So where you've ironed that over, bring that back out again and just align the single piece of the shoulder seams together. So that's front shoulder section and back shoulder section. And we're going to go and sew those two together. Okay, so I've sewn the two shoulder seams together at the back. I've trimmed them away slightly with pinking shears and I've ironed them nice and flat. So the next thing for us to do is to attach the back lining. So you've got this little circular piece, this is the back lining, and this is going on to those, where you've got those folded over bits, like that. Okay, if you take those folded bits out, lay them down flat, then you've got the two raw edges there of that shoulder seam. So this little circular piece, that's going to go in there. So right sides together. So that that's shoulder seam on to the lining, that little circular piece of lining. Flip it over, pull it around that way, and pin, oh, if you can get it on there, pin that little circular piece of lining onto that other shoulder seam. And then we're going to do exactly the same. Going to go and sew those two together. So I've done exactly the same as before. I've sewn those two shoulder seams, I've pinked them back slightly, and I've ironed them flat. So now what you've got is you've got like a circular set shirt. So you've got your back, you've got your two fronts with that ironed in fold line there, and you've got the circular bit, circular lining attached at the back, and that lining is attached to the two flaps that you folded over. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to neaten this edge. So that's the front edge of the shirt, round that lining bit and down that front edge, and you can do that with either pinking shears or an overlock or a zigzag stitch, whatever way you fancy. So that edge is taken care of, it's all overlocked nicely, and the next thing for me to work on is the collar. So you take your collar piece and you mark it out on your fabric. Now the best way to do this is to just take a piece of fabric that's obviously wide enough for your collar, fold it in half, pop your collar on, draw around that. You can draw around it in a lead pencil because you're going to cut that bit off anyway, and then you need to sew your seam allowance, which is your machine foot size. So I'll pop a pin in there so you can just see. You're going to sew all the way around the collar edge, just using that machine foot width, and then you can once you've done that, you can then cut it out. It's much easier to do it that way rather than trying to cut out two small fiddly pieces of collar and trying to line them up and match them together. So it's much easier to sew and then cut it out. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Okay, I've sewn around my collar all the way around the curved edge and the sides, and then I've pinked nice and close to the stitch line. So the next thing I'm going to do is turn it out right side facing, and I'm just going to use my dotting tool just to press out those seams. Okay, just give it a little pull to make sure those stitches are stretched. Okay, so I'm going to go and iron that, so that's going to be ironed nice and flat. Prior to doing that, I'm just going to take my main shirt piece and I'm going to, with my scissors, I'm just going to make some snips on this is the back and the front bit there. So I'm just going to do a series of small little snips so that when I come to lay that collar on, I can stretch this fabric out nice and flat. So it's much easier for fitting the collar in. They only need to be small little snips. So just all the way around. Okay, so I've ironed my collar. I've pressed it both sides so it's nice and flat. And then the next thing to do is just to find the centre point of that on that curved seam. So I find the centre point and I'm just going to pop a pin in. And then I'm going to find the centre point on the shirt back. So it's roughly, I would say, there. So I'm just going to pop my pin in there. So that's my rough centre back position. And we're going to put the collar onto the shirt back to start with. And as you can see, because I've done those snips, I'm able to pull it out flat, nice and flat, so it'll lay flat so I can get that collar on. So first thing to do, line up the 2 pins. And then start pinning the rest of the collar in place all the way around. Let's go for some coloured pins, shall we? And your collar is going to finish, so I've just put this last pin in, your collar is going to finish approximately 1 centimetre away from where you've done that crease line with your iron, where you folded that bit in. So it's approximately 1 centimetre away. So continue around the other side. And it should work out the same here as well. Approximately 1 centimetre away from that iron line. If you're out and it looks like you've got more one side than the other, just take the collar off and just start again and just tweak it in to fit so that it does look like it's laying symmetrically. Okay, so next thing we're going to do is we're going to go and sew along here, but I don't need to sew the machine foot width along here. Just going to bring it in slightly towards the raw edge, because we are going to do another stitch line when we bring that lining over. Okay, so I've sewn the collar in place where the pins were, and as you can see it's standing quite proud now. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to repeat those little snips along this lining, shirt lining back, and in that little section there. So it's just some small little snips so that we can ease that into the line of the collar. Okay, and then with that done, what we're going to do is we're going to take that back lining of the shirt and we're going to bring it over on top of the collar that we've already sewn. So we're sandwiching that collar in between the shirt back, there's your collar, and the shirt lining back. So line up the shoulder seams. It's the best thing to do first. Make sure that they're in alignment. Pop your pin in there. Line up that shoulder seam. And then it should all fit nicely in place. So all I need is another one pin there in that back section. Now that bit there's been ironed obviously the other way. You're just bringing that back for the moment, and you'll be able to see that your collar is finishing about 1 centimetre away. So there's the edge of my collar just there, which is about 1 centimetre away from where I've turned it over. So we pop a pin in there and we're going to start sewing right from that edge. And the same this side. So just pull that out. I'm going to finish our sewing on that edge there. Okay, so next thing, machine stitch all the way around there. Okay, so the collar is now sewn into the, it's sandwiched in between the shirt back and the lining area. I cut that seam back so that it's just zigzagged along there, so it's easy for ironing. And then I've pressed it and pulled the collar up as I'm pressing it. So I've pressed it that side, pulled the collar up as I've pressed it that side, and then I've also, when I've come round this way, I've just pressed that little section back there as well. Now if you're anything like me, completely clumsy, when I was snipping this off with my pinking shears, I went and cut right through the shirt at the back there. So I've just had to do a quick repair. Had a massive hole there. So I've just sewn that bit together. So if you wonder why I've got that line there, it's because that's a little repair job I had to do. So just go careful when you're pinking around that collar edge. What happened is I'd hooked some of the fabric up under the collar underneath and I didn't see it as I was sewing it. I didn't check it before I pinked it, which I should have done. And because I pinked it away, and then when I went to iron it out, I thought, oh blow, there's a blooming great big hole there. So yeah, do go careful. But don't really notice too much, does it? Anyway, so that's all ironed out nicely. So the next thing for us to do, I'm going to just show you with it that way around there like that, and that way like that. So you can see you've got those two nicely folded edges that you ironed in to start with, which is sitting backwards, and then you've got your little collar, which we're going to turn back, and then you've also ironed in that little flappy bit that goes over there as well. And then that's where your buttons or your press studs are going to go in that area down there. So the next thing we're going to do is the sleeves. Okay, so onto the sleeves. So with each sleeve I've run a gathering thread just through the top, 2 rows. I've used blue for my bobbin thread and red for my needle thread, so I know which one to pull. I'm going to pull my needle thread, which is the red. Now I've put gathering stitches in here, not that it's going to be a gathered sleeve. We're just putting these gathering stitches in so that we can ease that sleeve into the shirt and tweak it so that we can get it all sort of laying in nicely. So it's not a gathered top. Those gathering stitches are there just to ease the sleeve into the shirt. And I've also overlocked the bottom edge and turned it up slightly. You can either zigzag along that lower edge there if you haven't got an overlocker, or just pink and shear it along the lower edge, but just turn that up a really small section. Okay, so the next thing we need to do for our sleeves is we just need to make sure that we can pull this area, this curved area, out flat. So I'm just going to do some little snips. I will be careful, she says. So do little snips like that on both armhole edges of the shirt, and then that way you can pull that out nice and straight when you're putting your sleeve in. There's no left or right sleeve, they're both the same. Just make sure that you haven't got your lining hooked up, so push that way back, and the same with your collar, you want them out of the way. I mean, you could always just put a pin in there just to keep them out of the way while you're sewing in your sleeve. So you take your sleeve, find your centre point, and that's going to align with the shoulder seam there. So my centre point is roughly there. I shall align that in there. And then I take my outside edge of the sleeve and I lay it on the outside side seam of the shirt. Pop that on there. Pop a pin in. And then I can pull that out flat, and as you can see, that sleeve is slightly bigger than the shirt, and that's why we need to just pull those gathers in. So I'm going to take my two top threads, my red threads, and I'm just going to pull it. It's only a really small amount. Ease it back, secure off with a figure of 8, and then just tweak those gathers. I don't want gathers, I want them to lie flat, but I want it to fit in that shirt section of that underarm section. So just pop a couple of pins in, and as you're actually going around with your sewing on your machine, you can use a pin or a needle just to sort of pull the gathers away as you're sewing, so you don't want any gathers in the shirt. You just want those gathers there to be used to help tweak it through. So that's that side held in place. And then the same with the other side of the sleeve. Pop in a couple of pins. Pull that gather thread through. So I'm going to pull on that red thread. Let's get rid of that blue. Really needs to gather in a slight little bit, just to see that it fits to the armhole of the shirt. Secure that off. And then the same as before, just ease those gathers through so that they're going to lay nice and flat on that shirt armhole. And then we're going to sew in between the two gathering threads all the way along there, making sure that I'm pulling out those gathers and that there is not going to be a gather when I'm sewing it. Then I'm going to trim the excess carefully without cutting a hole in the shirt. And then I'm going to either zigzag or overlock that area there, just to keep that nice and tidy. Okay, see you back here in a mo. Okay, so I've sewn the sleeves in and I've ironed them flat, and as you can see, they're sitting nice and snug into those armhole areas. I've also sewn a line on the lining. I like to actually sew that lining down so that when you're putting the shirt on, Ollie, it doesn't sort of flick up and get in the way of the collar. So I just run a stitch line just along that back curved edge, just up to where the sleeves are. So it's just a little straight, not straight, a little curved stitch line all the way along there. So the final machining left to do is to take the sleeve edges, align those together on that inside edge, pop a pin in there, under the arm, and then down through both the side seams. And we're going to sew each of those two sides together. Then you're going to neaten that edge either by pinking, zigzagging or overlocking. And then after you've done that and both the sides are sewn together, you are going to neaten the bottom edge of the shirt as well. You can either do that by just running a zigzag stitch through there and turning it up to a slight hem, or overlocking or pinking. Okay, so here's the little shirt finished. All the seams have all been ironed out nicely. I've done a little hem along the bottom. I've done a couple of stitches on that bit there just to hold that inside bit in place, and I've attached some fashion snaps onto the front. We've got these fashion snaps in our online shop, so they always look nice. I just finished the little shirt off quite nicely. Slip those together. So yeah, there's Ollie's lovely little shirt. Okay, so next I'm going to show you how to make his shorts. Okay, so onto the shorts. Now I've cut out the short pieces. Now what you need to be aware of is these shorts, they're very similar on that back centre seam as they are on the inside leg seam. The front section of the centre front seam of the shorts is shorter than the back centre section. So what I tend to do is I put a little mark when I'm cutting it out. I just put a little mark on the back of the top of the centre seam so that I know that that is the back section and this is the front section, not to get muddled up with the inside leg or the centre front. So I know that this is my back seam here. Okay, so first things we're going to do is align the centre seams to the front, right sides facing, and we are going to sew that seam there. Okay, so I've sewn that centre seam and I've pinked the edge and I've just ironed it flat. I've also run a zigzag stitch along the top of the waistband edge and also along the bottom of the hem edges. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn this over, this top waist edge, about 1 centimetre all the way along, and I'm going to do 2 rows of stitching. I'm going to do one obviously at the bottom where the zigzag line is, plus I'm going to do just another little one right at the very top edge all the way along there. Plus I'm going to turn up the hem, just giving it a small little hem there. And I'm just going to sew along the bottom edge of the hem. So I've sewn along the top 2 lines of stitching and I've sewn the hem on the bottom of the leg. So the next thing to do is to do the elastic for the waist. Now just put the elastic around Ollie's waist, see how snug it fits, and then just remove by about 1 centimetre, and then that should be the right size that you need for the waist elastic. I've just put a little safety pin in the end of there, and we're going to run it through the casing at the top. So when you get past that centre bit, just start pulling it through, and when the elastic looks like it's just about to disappear on that edge there, before it does disappear, so it's right on the edge there now, I'm just going to pop a pin in. That's going to stop it from going through, and then I can continue to pull the elastic through. So out it comes the other side. Then I'll take my safety pin off and just pull that back to there, and then I'm going to put another pin in there, and then before I tweak those gathers I'm just going to go and sew a couple of lines down there backwards and forwards just to hold that elastic in place in that section there. I've done the 4 rows of stitching just to hold the elastic in place, and you can see my gathers are all bunched up on this end, and to get them evenly spaced you just take the 2 ends and you pull out and bring back in, and as you can see now all the gathers are all nicely evenly placed, so you haven't got to worry about, you know, pulling them along. Just by pulling those 2 elastics on the outside edge, bringing it back in, that will even those gathers out nice and uniform. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take the back centre seam and we're going to close that. So align the back edge together, pop a pin in, down through the crutch, pop a pin in there, and we're now going to sew that section together, pink the edge and iron flat. So that back centre seam's all nicely sewn together, pinked and ironed flat, and then the last thing to do is to sew this centre inside leg seam together. So just align the crutch seams together first, making sure that you've got your centre seams nicely folded outwards, and then take it down to the lower hem edge, pop a pin in there, and then the other side, and then you're going to sew up both inside areas of the legs. Okay, so that inside leg seam is now nicely stitched, pinked and pressed out. And then when I ironed it, when I turned it right side out, I just lay it flat, and I just tend to iron this inside seam here. So iron up through here and iron up through here. I don't iron that outside edge there because I don't want a seam line there. So yeah, so there is your lovely little pair of shorts for Ollie. I'm going to go and get him dressed. So yeah, here he is. What a cool little dude in his lovely little shirt with his little fashion snap fastenings, his shorts. These are the longer length shorts out of the pattern, and he's sporting his new Baypod shoes. Aren't they just the cutest? I think he really likes those. So yeah, have fun making your Ollie outfits. You can lengthen the shorts if you want. You can end up making trouser lengths. You just need to add on a couple of centimetres for the trouser length there. So yeah, so I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope that answers your queries that a lot of you had on how to construct that shirt with that back lining facing that I think was confusing people. But hey, should be all clearly explained for you now. So yeah, so on that note, Ollie and I say bye. See you later.